What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. What we have witnessed in recent days, without a doubt, became a moment of historical significance. It also showed that history always repeats itself, no matter what or how. It always finds the way to restore the balance and bring those responsible to justice. A regime that stayed in power for 53 years and thought by many as immovable and irreplaceable, fell apart in just a matter of days. Its leaders, who only weeks ago appeared unshakable, found themselves scattered and powerless. There was no great siege that drained the last of their strength, no heroic last stand against overwhelming odds. Instead, there was a surprising but yet logical absence of defenders willing to fight and die for a system that had demanded for so long the unquestionable loyalty. And the country we are talking about is obviously Syria, with the regime of Bashar al Assad, one of the biggest friends of Putin. Russia itself has been supporting Bashar al Assad for more than a decade, and having such a strong ally made Bashar think that he is invincible. That's why the events of last week were so unexpected. This sudden, inglorious downfall serves as yet another example of the fragility of dictatorships. When the instruments of repression falter and foreign sponsors turn away, the entire structure collapses almost at once. And just like every other dictatorship failure in the past, it follows a pattern familiar in world history. Where there is no genuine public support, only enforced compliance, a regime can, and as you can see, will, vanish overnight, leaving its supporters and its enemies equally astonished. A dictatorship's core strength is measured not by number of battalions and mercenaries it commands, but by the willingness of ordinary people to rally in its defense. In this particular case, the regime was apparently abandoned by all who might have stood by it. Even a small measure of resistance could have slowed down the advance, forcing attackers to struggle for every inch of the ground. Here, however, no such resistance happened. Syria's armed forces, hailed for years as a capable and determined apparatus of state power, melted away at a critical moment. The capital's defenses crumbled with breathtaking speed. I personally don't even remember reading any news about significant battles. It was only the attackers advanced there, then they advanced here, took this city, took another one, and so on. This was not the result of overwhelming military power on the side of the insurgents. Rather, it spoke to the regime's true nature. Its citizens did not resist the attackers because they felt no allegiance to the leaders who had ruled them through fear and brutality. The overthrowing of this regime, accomplished in days rather than months or years, proves first and foremost the illegitimacy under which it was held. The Syrian dictatorship idea, so dependent on foreign firepower and its own capacity for violence, proved completely useless in the face of its own internal problems. All the marches, meetings, TV broadcasts of unified support for Bashar al Assad, including for the international audiences, were nothing but a display of support, which had nothing in common with the reality. For more than 50 years, the international community observed a dictatorship that seemed irreplaceable. It mostly benefited from a persistent narrative that suggested it was a much-needed protection against Middle East extremism. The regime's propaganda insisted it stood between order and chaos, and that if it were to fall, the country would plunge into never-ending disaster. Yet, as you can see, this argument crumbled under the weight of reality. Genuine governments, when find themselves in danger, always have the defenders who fight not only because they're forced or are out of duty, but also from a sense of national belonging. Take Ukrainian case, for example. The invasion started, and thousands of Ukrainians rushed to draft offices to enlist. Weapons were distributed, and people's militias created. This is the example of unwavering, determined support that a country which truly cares about its people should get. In Russian-Ukrainian case, it is David versus Goliath, where Ukraine is bravely resisting its neighboring giant for almost 3 years. In case of Syria, it is completely the opposite. Here, the rapid collapse indicated the regime had never secured that vital bond. Its people might have tolerated it because they were forced to do it, but the moment its apparatus began to fail, there was no incentive to take up arms in its name. The core principle of this dictatorship, rooted in violence and intimidation, evaporated as soon as foreign mercenaries, proxy forces, and distant backers started its march towards capital city Damascus. In a single moment, its carefully constructed image of strength turned to dust. Syrian dictator Bashar al Assad fled to Moscow and sought asylum there, which luckily for him, he got it. That's the least thing Putin could have done after completely abandoning his friend at the first sign of danger. As you can imagine, Putin could not care less about the destiny of his so-called friend Bashar al Assad. Not a single tank, plane or a soldier was sent to Syria to fight against these rebels. But there is at least one major thing that makes Putin very concerned, and that is just how fast Bashar's regime, which survived twice longer than his, collapsed. This will be an example for the people of Russia that dictatorships can and should end, and it's up to people to decide when they want to resist the authoritarian leader. The last thing Putin wants is for his people to get an idea that governments can be overthrown. That's why the events in Syria are almost not covered at all by any of the media. And those reports which do appear in the news are mostly dismissive as insignificant. The narrative is that Syria is so far away from Russia, so let them deal with their own problems. Why should we interfere? I just wonder what they said back in 2015, when Russian soldiers entered Syria to protect the very same regime of Bashar al Assad. The downfall of this regime also calls into question the strategic wisdom of those who spent years assisting its survival. It was obviously not established because of how much the people of Syria loved and respected al-Assad family. It owed much of its longevity to the military, financial, and diplomatic support of powerful allies, such as once again Russia. There were triumphant announcements and self-congratulatory claims of having outsmarted rival powers. Just exactly what Putin does right now, by saying to his people that Russians yet once again outsmarted NATO and outplayed America. But this is swift and humiliating and reveals how empty such statements and celebrations can be. The billions of dollars, the lives of soldiers dispatched to protect a distant tyrant, and the elaborate propaganda campaigns that praise this alliance have now yielded nothing. Scenes of rebels swiftly seizing modern combat vehicles and aircrafts, while former leaders vanish or are taken captive, serve as a reminder that foreign backing cannot manufacture legitimacy. It, at best, just buys the regime much needed time to decide what to do next and how to maintain the power. The entire concept of dictatorship is just like a countdown clock. You can delay the inevitable for as long as possible, but eventually the timer reaches zero. You cannot turn around time, just like you cannot prevent the inevitable end of a dictatorship. After all, it is always up to people how they want to be ruled and live. And generally speaking, people do not usually peacefully coexist side by side with ruthless authoritarians. It is in human nature to resist the limitations, and the more things you restrict, the greater the resistance becomes. And as history proved countless times, the boiling over point, the moment of "that's enough, we are so tired, something has to change," always comes seemingly out of nowhere this moment. There will be signs, but almost nobody believes that it is possible until the uprising actually begins. And it is possible in Russia as well. Just remember the unfinished march of Prigozhin towards Moscow. With the regime gone, the country finds itself in a very unstable new era. It was not a clean transition from tyranny to freedom. Rebels with extremely different ideologies, ranging from those with good intentions all the way to extremist religious radicals, took part in this rebellion. The power vacuum draws in various factions, including radical militants who present themselves as the new order. And let me tell you, they are most certainly not planning to build American-style democracy in Syria. They are not the weakest force either. They may smile for cameras, promise to spare religious minorities, and gesture at inclusive governance, but the history has shown us that extremists rarely govern with a gentle hand once their power is secure. Those so-called political experts who praised the rebels for destroying the regime of al-Assad just because he was so closely tied to Putin can be very, very wrong in their swift judgments. When one evil topples another evil, it does not necessarily mean that the winning side will suddenly turn good once they secure the reins of power. Removing the dictator is just the very first step in reshaping the country. Most likely, some sort of civil war will follow, with various factions trying to seize the control. This is what will truly determine the future of Syria. So those people who tell you that Syria is already saved just because Bashar is no longer in power should probably, at the very least, abstain from such comments. The reshuffled landscape includes not only local insurgents, but also foreign actors with their own agendas. Nearby countries will be tempted to establish their own influence over the country. Groups that were once limited by state repression now have total freedom to pursue their own ambitions, potentially turning the region into a stage for renewed conflicts. When a king's throne is empty and there is no heir in sight, the fight for power begins. The new and maybe even unexpected alliances will be formed among these groups. There is no guarantee that the apparent calm or any promises of tolerance will endure. And as always, the ones who will be paying the highest price are the regular people, whose homes will be torn by raging conflicts. Just as history unfortunately always showed. Because it always repeats itself, no matter what. The historical cycle that took Al Assad family, ruling 53 years out of power, is the very same cycle that took out Gaddafi and his 42 years regime. The very same that ended 24 years of Saddam Hussein. And it was no different when a Romanian dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu, ceased to exist in a matter of days after 15 years of rule. All of them failed. No one found a way to steer the balance of universe in their favor. So what does make Putin think he is different? Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims are all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous